Future Hacker. Life. Path. Future.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Future Hacker. I'm your host, Maria Taide, and today we're talking to Matthew Barrett. Matthew is the founder of GoClick, a global football storytelling platform helping people understand one another and the world through football. He has a multidisciplinary background in the sports industry, spanning communications, sponsorship sales, and partnership activation, working with international brands and rights holders. He graduated with a first in modern history from Oxford University in 2007, focusing on the relationship between sports, politics, and war. Hi, Matt. It's so great to have you here with us. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much for having me.
Matt, I'd like to go straight to the point with you, as I found this connection to be interesting in so many levels, the relationship between sport, politics, and wars. Could you please indulge us?
Absolutely. I feel like it's a great origin story of mine, particularly in relation to the work that I do now. So if I take us back to when I was a student at university studying modern history, I loved the Second World War. It was a real part of history that I enjoyed studying. But on the side of that, outside of academia, I was hugely into my sport, both playing and following. And at that time, I'd never really seen the connection between the two. And it was pointed out to me one day, I pretty much remember it like it was yesterday, that could I potentially find a way to link these two things? And so fast forward a year, I did. And I spent a lot of the rest of my time at university writing about sports and politics, sport during the Second World War, and really seeing those linkages. And once you see it one place, you see it everywhere. So I ended up writing a lot about sport in the British Army in the Second World War, how it was used by soldiers, used by the armed forces themselves for morale building, but also importantly, I think this comes into a lot of what I do now, how it was seen as hope for the future and the role that sport played in giving a narrative about what the rest of life would be like was something that really hooked me in. Even in the middle of huge conflict, sport was there as this beacon for hope for the future. It was used a lot by newspapers, by authorities to say, when you win the war, there will be lots of sport for you at home. I know that sounds a bit reductive, but it's true. And so how that then plays into my world now, I mean, I'm one of these people that sees sport as completely related to politics. I don't have much time for this notion that they are separate. Sport isn't divorced from reality. Sport is important everywhere, and it's a really great representation of life. And so I think I personally have seen that relationship everywhere around the world, whether it's debates around Qatar hosting the World Cup, which is after all an exercise in soft power and politics, whether it's your country in Brazil or my country in the UK hosting Olympic Games, whether it's rebuilding a country like Rwanda after genocide, or whether it's introducing sport into refugee camps. I personally see sport everywhere and completely related to politics and conflict.
That's really interesting, Matthew. And looking with those lenses, it does really relate to each other. That's something that I really never gave any thoughts about. So I'm really glad you're here with us. You know, according to the United Nations, 79.5 million people were forcibly displaced from their homes in 2019. This means 1% of the world's population is displaced, and of those, 40% are children. And it's believed that this number will keep growing, and it will be the major global crisis of the future. This is a matter of preparing our current young generation in topics like inclusion, diversity, and acceptance of different cultures, so future politics would have to face and embrace this issue way better than what we're doing today. So the reason I'm asking you this question is that you are completely involved in those stories, like vulnerable people, refugees, women in sports. So what would be your take on that?
That's a big question, and one which I have a lot of views on. I think first of all, it's important to address what we're trying to do with Goal Click. And we're finding people from all around the world, and we're asking them to tell their own story about their lives and communities through the lens of football. But really, it's about storytelling from that first person perspective. This is not about outsiders going in to tell someone's story. This is about giving the power, the freedom, the control, the platform to individuals to tell their own story and their own truth. And the reason why I think that's important is because I think it can be even more powerful to hear about these kind of issues directly from people involved. I think it really adds a rawness, a layer of authenticity when it's truly from that person's perspective, that person's mouth through their eyes. So we naturally have found ourselves working in countries and in areas and with topics that do cover pretty heavy and pretty complex issues. We've done a lot of work in the refugee sector, finding refugees and asylum seekers and internally displaced persons from all around the world in refugee camps, in new host communities, or making it in the world of football, and asking them to tell their own story as they see it through their experiences with football can create both powerful visuals, but powerful stories that really bring home the weight of the issues involved. And one thing I like to say is that a lot of these issues are really complex and really heavy and really hard to engage with. Gender equality, refugee rights, conflict, the list goes on. Climate change, ironically, a massive factor behind probably the future displacement and creation of refugees. All of these topics, I think they're things that people care about, but they're not necessarily things that people prioritize. And I think what football does, and where our work with, say, the UNHCR around creating this Goal Click Refugees series, where football plays a really big part is almost by stealth, getting people involved and interested in other people's stories, but in a way that they can truly understand what's going on, and they can start to have some empathy and understanding with other people around the world. And it's not something they're, lectured on or forced to engage with, but football's a language, it's a common language for us all that we can understand. And then, almost like a Trojan horse, we start to care a bit more about the people who are telling us that story. So for me, I think that by giving people that platform and letting their voice be heard, when we consume that, we understand them a little bit more and we have more empathy with their situation. So that's why I think it's really important that issues like displacement and the refugee crisis, that football has a way of making it more understandable and increasing empathy with people who are going through that situation.
That's beautiful. It's about finding this common language, understanding each other, and having more empathy to each other. And that's definitely something that we need nowadays, right? So let's talk about those stories that you've been hearing. You believe that soccer stories are powerful enough to connect the world. That's a powerful statement, right? Especially now. So what's behind this theory? And have you been able to keep track of those stories now during the social distancing time?
So I have an interesting perspective on this question. I think that there is a tendency to see football as somehow connecting the world and uniting the world. And this idea that, if only there was football, everyone would get on and we'd all be one big happy family. I think that what it actually does is it gives a window into someone else's existence and that understanding. So I think at the outset, you have to say that we're not expecting football to bring the whole world together, but it can help us all understand one another a little bit better. So I think if we talk about connection in that way, I think it's quite helpful. In terms of how we've been able to do that during the pandemic times, we've actually been able to do it quite well because of the way in which we tell our stories. So what we do is everyone we work with, we provide a disposable analog camera, so 27 shots on a roll of film, and they capture their world as they see it in their local community, and then they write their own story alongside that. So it's quite a decentralized model. There's no one traveling to another place. It's all about finding the individual and empowering them to tell that story. So actually, pandemic hasn't really affected things that much because football still continues at local and community levels in most places the whole time. And so I think we've been slightly immunized from problems that a lot of organizations might have around travel and getting access to people to tell these stories. We actually have found that there's been almost no let up. And actually, in some cases, it's even more interesting to see what's going on at these times. So, yeah, we found that the way we tell stories and prioritizing that first-person perspective has meant that we've been able to continue telling those stories at all times.
So can we go deeper into how you guys are working? So you're basically shipping out disposable cameras around the world. So how is it going? Like, what's the percentage, you guys, that you actually get those camera back? How is it?
This is one of my favorite questions, to go into the real logistics of GoalClick. So yes, we ship out disposable cameras to people wherever they may be. I would say that we have a pretty good success rate. Now, some countries' postal services are better than others. That's definitely for sure. I won't name any names, but it's probably exactly what you expect. And yeah, when we find a person that we want to collaborate with, we send them out that disposable camera, we give them some guidance, some context on the project, and then it's really over to them. They usually take some weeks, maybe some months, in some cases, like North Korea, 4 years, to return the camera to us. And then we develop the films, share the photos with the participants, and get them to write their story before we publish it on social media, on our website, and we create lots of exhibitions as well. And we're starting to move into other ways of telling these stories, like through audio and video and spoken word, all of which created by the participant, the storyteller themselves. So yeah, it's quite a logistical undertaking, and sometimes that can be slightly frustrating. But when you do get a film back, you know, the first time we ever did this project, we started in Sierra Leone. So we found church minister called Pastor Abraham Bengura, who was also the manager of the National Amputee Football Association of Sierra Leone. And he was our first storyteller. And we sent out a camera. We had pretty low expectations. And then 3 months later, we got a package back and we developed the film. And the first photos we ever saw from the GoalClick project were incredible. I encourage everyone to go on to our website and take a look at the National Amputee Football Association playing on a Freetown beach. And it's incredibly powerful photography created by someone who's deep within that community. You probably couldn't get that photography if you weren't part of that community. And then on top of that, the story that he told of the legacy of civil war, amputations. Abraham himself has lost 2 fingers due to a hand grenade. But then the reintegration in society that football assists with, it's very powerful storytelling. And it's something that people don't often see and don't often hear.
That's amazing. So do you have any specific story that we could say that most influenced your life?
So that Sierra Leone story will always be very special to us because it was the first. But we found ourselves teaming up with lots of different organisations who are doing incredible work all around the world in quite unlikely places at times. So we've worked with an organisation called Spirit of Soccer, which is present in many countries around the world, always where there's been war zones. So Laos, Cambodia, Colombia, Ukraine. And what they do is they educate children on the danger of landmines and explosives through football. And we worked with them in northern Iraq in 2015, at the time when Islamic State was at the height of its power. And they were coaching and running football sessions 30 kilometers away from the front line where ISIS were controlling territory and where some of their coaches were living under ISIS rule. And seeing boys and girls being coached by men and women, given the context of the situation at the time. Just a really powerful image and story that makes you think about the power of football to make real change in the world. Not just play for play's sake. It's not that kind of old model of, oh, give people a football and everything will be okay. It's really intentional use of sport to make change and make things better, whether that be in health, in education, in conflict resolution. There's so many ways that sport can help. So I think those stories really open my eyes to the power of football and what change it can bring in the world. I think that the other series that's particularly opened my eyes is this refugee series that we are doing with the UNHCR, and particularly with young girls, predominantly of Syrian and Afghan extraction, making new lives for themselves in a Jordanian refugee camp or in a new host community, whether that be Australia or Austria or the UK or the United States. And I think it's very apparent that in every single culture in the world, it's harder for girls and women to make it onto the pitch and to play and succeed at football. Social barriers, cultural barriers, political barriers. And so when you factor in a girl from a country where football is not necessarily encouraged for girls, and when you throw in that they're also a refugee in a new country, for them to have the courage, the resilience and the perseverance to play in the face of so many barriers is very inspiring, and it motivates me to keep doing what we're doing, because I've got an easy job. I'm just telling their story. They're the ones that are actually doing it, and that really is the ethos of Gold Click. We want to be that platform for those voices which are silenced, marginalised, overlooked, unheard. And the more work we do in the more countries, the more kind of stories that we find like this.
That's so many amazing stories. You know, it's Future Hacker. I have to get into the technology part somehow, right? And I'd like to change course a little bit here and talk about a very, very current and very trendy subject right now, which is those NFTs, non-fungible tokens, that are super trendy, especially when we're talking about the arts and even the gaming world. So at the end, your assets are those digital photos that you're getting back, right? And I even went to your website and I thought that you're actually selling it to get funding for the projects. So are you actually considering adventuring in the NFTs world as a source of income for your projects? And were you actually considering that before you got my question?
What a wonderful question. So I'll be really honest with you. It's probably one of the favourite questions I've ever been asked about Gold Click. It's not necessarily something that I had made advanced plans towards, but I've been following the recent journey of NFTs quite closely. And it's definitely something that we're looking at. I think that our model is currently set up more to be a business-to-business model. So we're a sponsorship and partnership funded organisation, which means that we work with organisations and brands and clubs and governing bodies like FIFA, UEFA, Adidas, New York City Football Club. And we tend to create these bigger, deeper series, which is how we get our revenue stream to allow us to do all the other wonderful work that we want to do in parts of the world where we obviously then don't have to charge any money to do that. What we do need to improve on is, I guess, our more consumer offering. And that includes selling prints, selling merchandise, selling books, and, as you say, potentially looking at other more advanced ways and more imaginative ways of monetizing the project, sustaining the project, and ultimately delivering some revenue back to the organizations and the people that we work with. So what you've done is you've actually sparked my thought in this area. What I think that NFTs is representative of, which I find really interesting, is the democratization of content. 50 years ago, there was only a few gatekeepers who could sell media. Whereas now, as we've seen for the last 10, 15 years, through the rise of social media, and now we're entering into this whole new space where NFTs are just the tip of the iceberg, I imagine. There are so many more opportunities for people to monetize their art and their creativity. And I actually think that's really exciting. Now, whether it's NFTs or whether it's something else, I think there's a huge opportunity for GoldClick, but for everyone really, because ultimately GoldClick is just a representation of the world. There's a massive opportunity for people to sell their creativity and their content in a way that hasn't been possible before. So I'm very interested with where we could go with this. I think that there's some complexity specifically with GoldClick around ownership of photography when it's done in the way that we do it. So we tend to own the rights, but then sub-license them back to the photographers. And so we'd probably need to we'd want to go into kind of collaboration with them to kind of really make the most of a technology like this. But I think the broader point is what a great time to be an artist or a content creator, because there's going to be more technology coming down the line which can deliver revenue back to organizations that need it. So even if it's not GoldClick, I may encourage other people we work with to start thinking along these lines.
Of course, and this is amazing indeed. It's so new, but it's exactly what you said. It's a form of democratizing and actually valuing the work that, usually very, very few people are able to do that. Now it's a way of making it possible, right? So I have a last question for you. And, giving this access, this amazing access that you have to so many different people in the world and all types of stories, when you absorb all that and when you look into the future, do you consider yourself an optimist that we are headed to this more inclusive society? Or do you think that if we don't change our ways now, we're headed to this darker place?
Can I ask you a question in return? Is there a year in history that you wish you'd been born in terms of before you were born or after you were born?
So, when I look back, I can just see that we are evolving in humanity, right? So I never felt like I wished I was born in any year before ours. But, you are changing roles in here.
I ask it because it's a question I often ask when I'm asked this question. I'm not asked it that often, but it comes up a lot because of what I'm about to say. I think anyone that says they would rather have been born earlier than they were is, I think, slightly ignorant of history. And as a historian of the early 20th century and having, taken a big interest in the history of the world through the last few thousand years, the mind can't compute how different life was and how many reasons there would have been to have not made it past childhood during those times. So I am 1,000,000% an optimist. Now, that is not to say that there are not massive, massive challenges in our world. But that is also not to say that things might not get worse in the short term, even medium term future. People in 1925 didn't necessarily imagine that the horrors of the Second World War would come along in 15 years' time. However, I do believe, and it maybe is cliche, that the arc of history bends towards progress. And in the long term, I do think we're heading into better places. I believe in the human spirit and technology and us being able to solve problems. I think history teaches us that we kind of have a track record of generally solving problems, even if they may become too late for some. None of this is to marginalize the unbelievable levels of suffering that exist in many specific countries with many specific people who've had to flee their homes and have been displaced, who are suffering from the ravages of climate, who would probably say to this question, well, of course things aren't getting better. So this is not to discount that, but I am a genuine believer that we are heading in the right direction. And a lot of the stories that GoldClick covers give me hope for that because, okay, this is just football trying to solve some problems around better healthcare, better education, resolving conflict, gender equality. And if it's just football that's doing that, imagine what everything else is doing and the minds that are at work to kind of make the world a better place in the future. So I think that sometimes as a species, we suffer from short-termist catastrophizing, where we can only see what's directly in front of us and what's just directly come behind us, and we lose the context of what's happened before. So, yeah, I'm an absolute optimist, and I think there'll always be problems to solve, but we're moving in the right direction. The one thing that does maybe worry me slightly is that I think that we have progressed as a species by building connections between communities, within nations, between countries. Generally, the more exposed you are to other people and other points of view and other cultures, the better. So that's why I think Gold Click plays a very important role in doing that. The one potential issue, and we've experienced it in our lifetimes now, is when you can't connect with others, and walls go up and borders go up and there's less exchange of ideas and people coming into contact with new people. But I think that the technology we've got now is probably going to be an answer to that as well. So I'm on balance comfortable that my children or my grandchildren, hopefully I have some, will find the world in a better place than we do today. And I hope that they don't look back and wish they'd been born now or were born 20 years ago. But they might do, because that's what humans do. So maybe that's the constant, that humans will always think that the past was better.
Matthew, thank you so much for your time with us. It was great having you as a guest. Unfortunately, our time is over, but I do wish you the best. That's a great project that is out there. We're going to leave the link in our website as well. And, we are open to come back here anytime to talk about whichever evolution come from. Who knows, maybe talk about the NFTs. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And it's been great speaking to you. And if anyone does know a great story in the world through football, we'd love to know about it and love to tell it. So hopefully you've got some listeners who have been inspired by some of what we've been saying.
Future Hacker. Life. Path. Future.